In Panther Princess Tangled Loyalties, Calys, a fierce panther princess unaccustomed to the refinements of high society, finds herself navigating a treacherous path between love, duty, and betrayal. Hailing from a clan of warriors where survival means fighting tooth and claw, she is betrothed to Pasquale Hernandez, a strategic-minded panther who prefers tactics over brute force. Despite their differences, Calys understands the union's political significance for her pack. As the couple ventures into the ominous Everglades accompanied by a group, led by the enigmatic Alejandro Moretti, tensions rise. Alejandro, a werewolf guarding secrets of his own, becomes Calys' unexpected ally and protector amidst growing threats. Unknown to her, Stefano, a noble from Pasquale's pack, harbors a secret affection for Calys and his own hidden agenda. Midnight encounters in the eerie wilderness reveal lurking dangers, including an ambush orchestrated by the ruthless Raoul, and the revelation of a mysterious scarred man pulling strings from the shadows. A deadly game unfolds as vampires and shifters clash, exposing hidden alliances and deepening the mystery surrounding the true motives of those around Calys. Amidst the chaos, a tender yet forbidden bond blossoms between Calys and Alejandro during stolen moments, challenging her impending nuptials and the fragile peace between their packs. When a hyena shifter, revealed to be an assassin, divulges information about the scarred man's plans, the stakes escalate. Calys grapples with her responsibilities as a future alpha, her growing feelings for Alejandro, and the looming threat that hangs over her and her people. With each step deeper into the wilderness, she must confront not only physical adversaries, but also the internal conflict between love and loyalty, discovering the price of leadership and the cost of following her heart. As dawn breaks over the Everglades and secrets are laid bare, Calys must decide where her allegiances truly lie, and whether the path to her destiny involves sacrifice, rebellion, or forging a new future that defies tradition. Panther Princess Tangled Loyalties weaves a tale of political intrigue, supernatural battles, and the enduring power of love in a world ruled by ancient instincts and shifting loyalties. Chapter 1. Calys. I wasn't used to parties. I might be a pack princess, but my pack didn't consist of fancy birds or powerful wolves. We were panthers, and that meant growing up outdoors and fighting. I was more at home in the woods of the Everglades than the red-carpeted ballroom of a first-class hotel. I preferred to be dressed for combat rather than a velvet gown so tight it felt like I wouldn't be able to breathe without bursting a stitch open. I knew how to kill with a lipstick and AK-47 and duct tape separately. But ask me how to wrap a gift without a paper bag? Or like now figure out small talk with shifters I had nothing in common with? The party is to your liking, Princess Calys? A noble from my fiancé's pack asked. I smiled brightly. It was the best answer I could come up with. Warriors didn't lie, you see, and as the future alpha of our pack, my father had raised me to be one. An awkward silence was born as the noble waited for my answer. When it became clear all I was going to do was smile, my fiancé Pasquale Hernandez smoothly stepped in. She is a very shy thing, my betrothed. That was a big fat lie and we all knew it. But then Pasquale was not a warrior by choice. Even when we were young, he was the only panther I knew who preferred to watch from the sidelines, using his brains to manipulate rather than clawing his way to victory. It was a good tactic and I admired him for. Maybe, when we were married, I could get him to teach me to be as patient as he was. When the nobleman walked away, Pasquale told me in an apologetic voice, I apologize for this, princess. I know you are not used to such gatherings, but it is what my pack expects. His voice was smooth and courteous, as perfect as his princely appearance. He was probably the only panther in the world to feel more comfortable with a shirt than without one, and the more formal, the better. You have nothing to apologize for. I am the one who is in the wrong. The more time I spent with Pasquale, the stiffer I became. I knew he had the makings of a Prince Charming, but honestly he felt more like a headmaster. The kind that hated people who talked using contractions. With him I always ended up saying I am and you are. And heaven forbid if I ever used gotta or wanna. Pasquale's gaze strayed to the main doors, where guests came through like an endless stream. I see some more of my friends arriving. Would you like to join me? I shook my head. You will only have to worry about me if I did. Please enjoy yourself with your friends. I am more than happy here. If you are sure? I nodded. I am. So please go. I couldn't help but think guiltily before I forget how to speak proper English. When Pasquale left, I managed to survive for 3.5 minutes. 2. 110 seconds of not looking at the dance floor where he was. Alejandro Moretti, the charming playboy prince from the Moretti werewolf pack, brother to the heir and, for over a week now, my cavalier. It meant bodyguard in PR. Guy, among other things, a champion that potential female alphas like me needed. In order to rule a pack without any objection from the Panthera. Tall, dark-haired, and possessing his pack's famous emerald green eyes, Alejandro was one beautiful specimen. I should know. I had seen him naked. Was just once, but it was more than enough. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't make myself forget. The look of it. The feel of it. I irritably pushed the rest of my X-rated thoughts away. I had to stop thinking of him that way. Especially now that I was engaged. Especially now that he was like that. Yes, I had lost the battle. I was now looking at my bodyguard, who was anything but. Bodyguards were supposed to stick close to their charges. They were supposed to be single-mindedly focused on anticipating and eliminating threats, but the only threat Alejandro seemed to care about right now was not getting laid. He was on the dance floor, a wicked smile on his lips as he flirted and danced with a female panther. Wait, I meant panther. The way she was so obviously panting after him had me distracted. He was dressed completely in black, as was his usual. The way his hands were roaming up and down her slender body, however, made it obvious that he might not be dressed for long. The thought had me sucking my breath in. I knew I had no right to be hurt, but I was princess. My lips curved in a relieved smile when Stefano suddenly appeared at my side. Tall, blonde, and gorgeous beyond belief, Stefano Gitticelli was also an impressive warrior. He had, in fact, all the makings of a true alpha, but because he was the bastard son of a jaguar pack leader, he had ended up becoming my father's right-hand man. You appear troubled. It was his way of asking if I was about to cry. Warriors were not supposed to cry, and he was basically telling me to go somewhere private if I was about to forget that lesson. I won't be troubled if we dance. Without a word, Stefano took my hand and whirled me onto the dance floor. He had spun me so fast it made me laugh as I placed one hand on his shoulder, while his other hand clasped my waist. No sparks flew as our bodies came close. From the very start, Stefano and I had always known his heart belonged to my younger sister. I was totally fine with that. Stefano, however, was still in denial. You do not need to force yourself to do this, you know. The words were deliberately vague, but because we had known each other for so long, his meaning was clear. Others who may have overheard him were likely to think he was referring to my engagement with Pasquale, but that wasn't it. I shook my head briefly. It's what the pack needs. And by that I meant Alejandro Moretti, although seeing him flirt with women wherever we went, and he had been doing that, cut my heart to pieces every time the thought of terminating his services hadn't occurred to me, and it never would. You're just too stubborn for your own good. That's what this is all about. You may be the one to inherit pack leadership, but you're too young to make decisions like this. You're only 19. Fate rarely calls upon us. Stefano sighed in exasperation. Don't. I blinked innocently up at him. What? We both have the same taste in movies, princess. So don't. When I opened my mouth, he said dryly. Transformers, Revenge of the Fallen. Crap. He really was good to know that I had been quoting Optimus Prime. I hate how you know all my favorite quotes, I grumbled. Stefano smilingly ruffled my hair. How could I not? All the comics, video games, and movies you got to enjoy were from me. He whirled me to the edge of the floor, and when I spun to a stop, I found myself looking up at Alejandro. He asked with a charming smile, Good evening, princess. Believe it's my turn for a dance. I couldn't make myself return it. I'm sorry, no. Around us the shifters gasped. Stefano frowned. My cheeks flushed red in shame. I had been so flustered by his sudden question that I forgot all about the extraordinary hearing of shifters. When I turned to face Alejandro to apologize, he beat me to speaking, his charming smile still in place. I understand, princess. My deepest apologies for forgetting my position. My cheeks turned redder at his words. He made it seem like I was refusing his offer to dance because he was just my cavalier, but of course it wasn't that at all. I think I need to go to the ladies' room. I meant it. The way everyone was watching us even more intently now was suffocating, and the way Alejandro was making me feel so guilty wasn't helping. At my words, Alejandro surprised me by suddenly bowing. Of course, princess. Let me lead the way. I glanced at Stefano. He nodded. I'll let Pasquale know where you are if he asks. After, I found myself following Alejandro, more than a little bemused at the sudden turn of events. A while ago he seemed hell-bent on ignoring me, dancing with one woman after another, and now he was acting like he couldn't serve me fast enough. Was it just him, or were all Lickens this moody? When I saw that we were heading towards one of the ballroom's side exits, I halted in my steps, asking warily, where are we going? The ladies' room inside here is always full of people. I thought you'd prefer some privacy, princess. Oh, you're right. Thank you. As we resumed walking, I couldn't help but stare. How could a man appear so beautiful and sexy even when he had his back to me? It shouldn't be so, but that was how it was, and I wasn't alone in admiring him. All the women we walked past had the same look on their faces, a look that was part wonder, part adoration. Alejandro turned left at a narrow carpeted hallway at the end of the lobby, stopping in front of a door, which he opened with a card key. Princess. It was only when I had stepped past him into the room that it occurred to me. Ladies' rooms weren't supposed to be locked with card keys, were they? And that was when I saw it. This was no ladies' room. This was one of the hotel's guest rooms, with a luxurious king-sized bed in the middle, and its own appointed suite. I whirled around just in time to see Alejandro lock the door. My eyes widened. What do you think you're doing? I hurried towards him, reaching for the doorknob, but the next thing I knew he had gotten hold of my shoulders. Another second and I was trapped between the door and his arms. He was suddenly too close, and my world seemed to shrink until everything I sensed was from him. The sound of his breathing, the hard feel of his body against mine, the seductive smell of his aftershave. A little uppity at the dance floor, don't you think, kitten? His voice was ominously soft over my head. This is all about me refusing you a dance? I demanded incredulously, even as I turned my head to the side, not wanting him to see my face. I didn't want him to know how affected I was by his nearness. Yes. Alejandro growled the word into my ear, making me jump, and the hairs at the back of my body rose in heightened awareness. A shockingly delicious sense of warmth started to spread all over my body, making me cringe inside. Couldn't believe I was so turned on when he hadn't even done anything to me. Why did you refuse me? This time he cupped my face to make me look at him. Why does it matter? I shot back. You've got so many ladies after you. Anyway. A wicked gleam flashed in his green eyes. Are you saying you're jealous? Kitten. I flushed, realizing that it was true. I had been jealous. I had no right to be. I was utterly stupid to feel that way, in fact, but it was the hateful and shameful truth. Nothing to say, kitten, he purred. Unable to lie, I found myself going on the offensive, anything to avoid admitting the truth. You disappoint me. The way you remain so carefree even when your pack's name is still tainted. The moment I said the words, I knew it was a mistake. I had good as called him a dog, a racial slur against his kind. You dare. Fury darkened his gaze. It was the last thing I saw before his lips slammed down on mine. My eyes involuntarily closed even as my body stiffened in shock. A second later I recovered myself and tried to struggle. But it was too late. He was kissing me the way I love to be kissed. The way he taught me to kiss. His lips, his tongue, his teeth. Alejandro used everything in his sexual arsenal to possess my mouth, dominating my senses in such a way that I barely noticed his hands expertly working on the back of my gown. I only realized what he was doing when I felt the gown falling to the floor, leaving my body completely bare except for a skimpy pair of black lace panties. But that was soon gone too, Alejandro breaking our kiss to rip the scrap of lace away from my body. Did you wear that for him? He demanded savagely. I shook my head. Right now, he was more animal than man, but instead of being frightened, I found myself even more hopelessly attracted, the triangle between my legs slowly becoming wet. For who then? He growled. He cupped my chin and kissed me hard before demanding once more. Who, damn you, tell me. His fingers dug into my hair. You owe me the truth, princess. In places like this, I'm the one you should follow. So tell me, he snarled. Who did you wear that for? His fangs clamped hard on my shoulder right after a bite that was so painfully arousing it broke through my resistance. You. My knees gave. Out, and I clutched his shirt hard for support as I choked the word out in an inaudible voice. Triumph glittered in his gaze. I should be bothered by it, but there was no time to even think of breathing. Not when he was kissing me again, and this time he was kissing me in a way that told me it was just the beginning. As we kissed, he started taking off his clothes, and I tried to help him, tugging on his belt while he shrugged off his formal jacket. As we gasped and kissed, he worked on the buttons of his shirt while I unzipped his pants. Shrugging off his shirt and throwing it to the floor, he lifted me up in one push. For a moment we looked at each other. His eyes were dark with desire, his face flushed. I was sure I looked the same. When we looked at each other, it was impossible not to see that underneath the passion were more turbulent emotions, words that we both wanted so much to say. God, those emotions. I wanted him to bear them to me. If he did, maybe I could be honest with mine too. I whispered, Alejandro. Something about my voice made me shudder. His gaze suddenly shuddered, and he rasped, no more talking. My body was still shaking with the aftershocks of my release when I heard a knock on the door. Prince Pasquale is looking for the princess, Your Highness. I recognized the voice as belonging to one of the Moretti wolves, who accompanied Alejandro, bodyguards of my bodyguard. The thought would have made me giggle if I wasn't reeling from the numbing realization of what we had just done. Looking straight into my eyes, Alejandro said coldly, distract him. We will be there soon. When I heard Alejandro's man leave, I tried to shrug out of his hold, but Alejandro's arms only tightened around me. Unable to understand why he wasn't letting me go after what we've been told, I jerked my head up in confusion. Our gazes met, and my own eyes widened when I saw the fierce and hungry possession glittering in his. He hated it. It was clear in his eyes. He hated the fact that another man was calling for me. Hope flared inside my heart, and I whispered unevenly, tell me. I knew I was laying my pride down the line once more with my words. I did it before for him, and he had ended up shaming me. But here I was again doing the same darn thing. Should I go to him? I swallowed. Tell me what I should do and I will listen. He didn't say a word. But a second later, I felt him gently lowering me to the floor, over my head. His voice had become cold and clinical. You're already doing what you should be doing. You have a future consort to support your claim for alpha, and you have me as cavalier to protect your independence. And at times like this, you've proven capable of comforting your dog when you need to. His hands dropped to his side as he turned away. I will leave you to dress, princess. I nodded and bowed my head. There went my pride again. The thought had me breathing deeply as I willed myself not to cry. Warriors did not cry, and if they had to, it shouldn't be over something like this. This time I really had to accept the truth. Alejandro Moretti would never forgive me for making him feel like he was nothing but a dog. Chapter 2. Alejandro. All noise inside the well-appointed conference room came to a halt when Calys entered, her bearing regal. Her blonde hair was combed straight, her deep blue velvet gown just the slightest bit wrinkled. She didn't smell like him, which was a pity, but Alejandro had been the one to make certain of it. There were less than 30 of them inside the room, with only Stefano and Alejandro, not belonging to the Hernandez pack. Standing at the back of the room, Alejandro was able to observe the panthers around him, and what he saw made him wary and vigilant. Calys' appearance seemed to have made half the Hernandez panthers uneasy. The other half appeared furious, as if itching for a fight. He glanced at Stefano. Where are your men? Stefano answered reluctantly, it's only me. Fuck. Alejandro didn't like this. The numbers were too skewed, even if he had Hulk Barbie by his side. Calys had finally reached her fiancé's side. Pasquale was smiling down at her, saying, I was worried about you, princess. Alejandro despised the possessive tone of the Hernandez heir. It made him want to punch Pasquale in the face. Pasquale drew Calys close to him, his hand settling against her hip. Alejandro had never seen him being this touchy with Calys before, not even during their own damn engagement party. It was disturbing. If all this touchy-feely shit was supposed to make Alejandro jealous, the Panther Prince was definitely doing a great job of it. Why are we meeting here? Pasquale's face turned grave. I am afraid we have unfortunate news, princess. He tapped the table in front of him, and Calys looked down. The table had a digital display showing the map of the state. One of the marked territories was the Adelardi Pack's stronghold in the north. Calys sucked in a quick breath at the sight of it. What happened? We found out that your cousin Raoul has planned an ambush. Alejandro's gaze met Stefano's. The Adelardi Pack leader's right-hand man had an unreadable expression on his too angelic face, but he sensed Stefano, feeling the same skepticism about the news. An ambush? Targeting whom? Calys asked. Pasquale answered simply. You. Her eyes widened. Me. You are the only one standing in his way to the throne, Your Highness. This from one of the Hernandez nobles, his tone contemptuous, making it sound like Calys was an idiot for being surprised. Calys didn't even blink, didn't even seem to care about the slur that was directed her way. But Alejandro did. In a second Alejandro had the man against the wall, his fingers wrapped around the noble's throat. Alejandro! Alejandro didn't understand Calys' shock. It was as if she hadn't expected him to come to her defense. Looking at the man he held by the neck, he said grimly, "Apologize to the princess." The air in the room was rife with tension, influenced by the aura of danger surrounding Alejandro. "Release my man." But Pasquale's voice died down when he caught a glimpse of the cold fury glinting in the werewolf's eyes. Damn it, why did this lichen care so much about Calys? The Moretti prince was the only blight in his horizon, an unpredictable factor that made Pasquale leery of making any unplanned move. "I mean you, no offense, Prince." The tone rather than the words had Pasquale's teeth gnashing. The lichen's voice was polite but bland, making it clear he didn't really give a shit about what Pasquale said or not. "But I only owe loyalty to the princess," Alejandro finished. He waited for Pasquale to argue. Privately, he hoped that the other prince would argue. He did, then Alejandro would have the right to kick his. Pasquale looked at Stefano. "Are you not going to reprimand him?" Alejandro was disappointed. Stefano shrugged. As the wolf said, he is only under the princess' command. Humiliated fury turned Pasquale's cheeks ruddy. Damn jaguar. He should have known he wouldn't get any support from the bastard. Once Calys was his wife, and he had her under his thumb, Pasquale would make the Gitiselli byblow. "Hey." Summoning a smile, Pasquale said to Calys, "Surely you would at least side with me on this, my princess." "Calys." The look on my fiancé's face made it obvious what he expected me to say. I bit my lip, trying to think of the best way to resolve the situation. Stefano and I were used to the insults that were directed my way, but I should have thought of warning Alejandro about it. "Calys, my dear?" Pasquale was beginning to sound testy. Before I could answer, we heard a yelp of pain, and I winced in horror when I saw Alessandro extending his arm, effortlessly carrying the man's weight as he pushed the panther further up against the wall. "Alejandro," I protested. "His head might." "Are you going to apologize?" Alejandro asked. The man spit at my cavalier. Alejandro's arm shot straight up, and this time his captive's head did hit the ceiling. Repeatedly. There was no change in Alejandro's expression as he hammered the ceiling with the panther's head. "What are you doing?" Pasquale shouted, making no move to help his pack member. "Is it not obvious, Prince?" Alejandro hit the ceiling with greater force, causing the man's temple to start bleeding. "There," he said in a very helpful manner. "Is it obvious now, Your Highness?" I was torn between horror and amusement. Maybe I really was a human monster. But I just couldn't make myself feel sympathetic for the panther Alejandro was currently treating like a jackhammer. I had never done him any harm, but like most shifters, he had hated me on sight. Pasquale stalked towards Alejandro and struck him from the back. I gasped. "Pasquale!" Without thinking, I moved towards them as well, but Stefano was suddenly there, holding me back. Stefano said in a low, grim voice, "Stay, princess. He cannot be your cavalier if it's you who comes to his defense." Knowing Stefano was right, I tried to appeal to Pasquale instead. He had never been this confrontational, so I couldn't get why he was being so antagonistic. "Pasquale, please don't." But it was as if he didn't hear me. There was a twisted look of satisfaction on Pasquale's face as he looked around him and saw all his men. He had the numbers on his side, giving him a sense of false bravado. Pasquale shoved Alejandro from behind. "Let him go." Another hard, taunting shove. Alejandro stiffened, and the air around us suddenly became heavier. Stefano muttered under his breath. Your fiancé has it coming now. Pasquale didn't seem to know it. Damn you, let him go, D. Without letting go or stopping his hammering, Alejandro's head slowly turned. To face my fiancé. If he wasn't mad before, he was now. Before you finish what you're saying, Prince, my cavalier's voice lowered, turning his next words into a threat. You need to remember one important thing. Is that so? Pasquale sneered, but his voice shook in the end. Yes. A smile slashed across Alejandro's lips. You are in my city, my territory, so if you think having this paltry few will keep you alive, think again. This hotel is surrounded by Moretti wolves. Right this very moment. They're all around us. Outside our door, on top of us, below us. They're everywhere. My head snapped to Stefano, but he didn't seem surprised. He must have sniffed out their presence well before now, and it just showed how ill-trained Pasquale's pack was. I looked back at the Panthers and saw the same truth dawning on their faces as fear filled their gazes. How many? I mouthed the question to Stefano. Dozens? Scores? Stefano shook his head. Hundreds. My jaw dropped. Alejandro's voice became silky. You were saying, Prince? Pasquale's face was white with humiliation, but it was clear Alejandro wouldn't let him go so easily. Behind him, one of the older Panthers said nervously, Your Highness, we wouldn't want a war on our hands with the Morettis. It was true. No Saint Alpha would want a war with the Morettis. The Lycan Pack Alpha's heir might be persona non grata right now, but it didn't mean the Morettis were poorer or weaker than they were before. If the periodic reports my father commissioned were correct, the Morettis had one of the strongest shifter armies in the world. Alejandro said mockingly, Your Highness. He dropped the man he was holding, as if finding him no longer interesting. The panther fell to the floor and curled into a ball. His pack members rushed towards him, exclaiming over the huge bleeding bump on top of his head. Prince Pasquale? Alejandro was slowly and steadily walking towards my fiancé, while the Panther Prince backed away. Stop! I command you to stop! Pasquale was clearly freaking out. Alejandro didn't. I'm truly interested in what you had to say earlier. What was it? Damn you, let him go! He lifted his hand. Pasquale's eyes widened and he yelled, Dugong! Silence fell. Alejandro's hand froze in the air. Slowly I covered my mouth. Dugong, like the cousin of the manatee, a heavy, slow-moving creature that was so ugly it was considered terribly cute? Stefano just as slowly looked at the ceiling, as if suddenly finding it fascinating. In my mind I was imagining Pasquale saying those very words. Damn you, let him go, Dugong. Oh God, was that better or worse, calling a Lycan royal like Alejandro Moretti a Dugong? Did Dugong shifters even exist? I looked at Alejandro, and again the words replayed in my mind. Damn you, let him go, Dugong. I tightened my hold over my mouth. Dear God, please do not let me laugh. Alejandro. Alejandro bent over the sink and splashed cold water on his face several times, hoping it would work like a dose of reality. He had always prided himself for being able to keep his cool. Unlike his twin Alessandro, he preferred to be more subtle when fighting. Or at least he used to be all that before Calys came into his life. Switching the tap off, he straightened and glared at his reflection on the mirror. What the fuck are you doing, Alejandro Moretti? He had sworn to himself he would no longer be emotionally involved in any way with Calys Adelardi, but no, he had done the opposite earlier. He came to her defense even knowing she didn't really need it, and ended up adding Pasquale Hernandez to the already long list of enemies of his pack. His phone rang, the screen showing his older brother's name. Domenico, he greeted. Alejandro. I'm sure you know why I called. Even though the heir to the Moretti pack's tone was lazy, Alejandro could still feel himself flushing. Only Domenico had the knack of making him and his twin feel like they were adolescent boys again. Alejandro tried to sound blasé. I have no idea what you mean, brother. The last time you were here, you told me you were just trying to cure your boredom, and that's why you became the Princess Cavalier. But now I'm receiving reports that you've just made an enemy out of the Hernandez pack. When Alejandro didn't say anything, Domenico continued in a sober voice. I know you don't want to hear this, but you will hear it anyway. You and I both know the princess means more to you than you're willing to admit. Alejandro's jaw clenched. Let's just put it this way. Your wife was nice, but look what happened. My princess? She isn't half as nice as Misty is. So we're better off this way. There was a moment of silence before Domenico spoke again. No, you're not. But I think you have to learn that the hard way. His voice turned brisk. Just take care of yourself. Hernandez may seem like a wimp, but I've always considered him cunning. He would never have maintained his position among the Panther if he wasn't. Understood. I appreciate the warning. Ending the call, Alejandro was about to leave the restroom when he heard voices outside the hotel's men's room. He recognized the voices immediately and he stopped, his hand falling from the doorknob. Be serious, princess. It was Stefano, his voice a mixture of exasperation and anger. I am being serious, and that's why I am commanding you to go back to our den and stand guard. I have the rest of Pasquale's pack with me. This was Calys, her tone adamant. Alejandro grimaced. He knew that tone. When his Hellcat used it, there would be no way of getting around her. Do not be so stubborn. I'm not. Stefano cursed under his breath. I just don't like this. Your cousin has never acted so openly against your father. It's not in his character. People change. You know it's true. Alejandro stiffened at the way Calys spoke. There was something she wasn't saying, something that made her very emotional. Stefano said in a low voice, if you are talking again about... Yes, you know I am. And that's why I am giving you this order as heir to the Alpha. Go back to the den and stand guard. A beat of silence, and then Stefano said, Yes, Your Highness. Thank you. I'll go back to Pasquale's side now. If you see Alejandro, please let him know we'll be leaving tonight for the north. When Calys left, Alejandro opened the door and came out. He was absolutely certain Stefano had detected his presence, so why not tell Calys about it? The blonde jaguar didn't even blink as their eyes met. He was on the phone, and Alejandro's eyebrow lifted in surprise when Stefano started to speak. I'm heading your way. Shut every window in your room, lock the door, and don't come out no matter what. His voice was fiercely protective. After a moment, Stefano hissed, No arguments. Do you understand? When Stefano was finished with the call, Alejandro blocked his way before the jaguar could even attempt to leave. What exactly is there between you and Calys? Stefano's stoic face didn't change. I don't believe you're in the position to ask that. Does she know? He bit out. Know what? His eyes bored through Stefano's. About the other woman in your life. That's not for me to discuss with you. However, if you may, I would like to ask you for a favor. As you have heard, the princess has ordered me to leave her side. I can only rely on you to protect her. Stefano paused. You are an honorable man, Moretti, so I hope I am not doing the wrong thing by trusting you to do your duty. She only has you to protect her now. Chapter 3. Calys. It was close to midnight when they reached the edge of the Everglades. The eerie atmosphere fed the legends surrounding it, and shifter packs that lived within and beyond the forest of towering pines did what they could to keep the stories alive. The more terrifying the stories, the better, for it kept prying human eyes away. Alejandro was looking around us warily. I don't like this. In truth, I felt the same way. There was just something foreboding in the air, making me feel swallow uneasily. We should go back and leave in the morning. In front of us, Pasquale laughed. Did you hear that, men? The werewolf is afraid of the dark. Ewu. Obnoxious laughter from his men followed his joke, which had been one of the many. It was evident Pasquale wanted to make up for the embarrassment he had suffered earlier, and he took every chance he could to pick a fight with Alejandro. We can't risk going up against Raul if it's true he set up to ambush us. I didn't stop walking as I spoke. Even in the dark, it was easy to navigate my way around the forest. This had been my home for over 18 years after all. Why can't we? Alejandro demanded under his breath. I answered simply, because it would mean pointless bloodshed, and I will always do everything to avoid that. Alejandro didn't answer. When I glanced at him, his eyes bored through me and I pursed my lips. I knew what he was thinking even without him saying a word. Clearly, he didn't think Pasquale's men would be any great loss. I was trying to think of a superhero quote to teach him about the importance of protecting innocent lives when I heard a rustling sound. I froze. Did you hear that? Alejandro pushed me behind him. Stay close. In front of us, Pasquale and the rest of his men had also gone still. A line of nervous tension formed around the prince's mouth as he said stiffly, I do not hear anything. Another rustle and then, Calys, is that you? A sigh of relief escaped me as I identified the voice and spotted a familiar figure emerging from my left. It was Jurian, a forest ranger that had been assigned to our territory over a year ago. Alejandro still hadn't budged in front of me. Who is he? Jurian came walking towards us, still in uniform, with a backpack slung over his shoulders. Hi, Yuri. Unable to get past Alejandro, I was forced to poke my head out from behind to smile at him. Tall and fair with the same baby blue eyes as mine, he would have passed as my twin if his hair wasn't more white than gold. Hello, Calys. It's nice to see you again. He looked at the men behind me. Curiously, Pasquale was suddenly at my side. Introduce me to your friend. His suspicious tone made me realize that all the shifters, including Alejandro, hadn't heard Jurian coming until he was right next to us. Maybe it was because he was here all the time and able to use the forest's noises to mask his footsteps. Mentally shaking my head at the mystery, I gestured to Pasquale. Pasquale, this is Jurian. He's one of the rangers assigned here and a close friend of the family. With humans, we always referred to the pack as family since it was safer that way. Jurian, this is I faltered. Although it had been a week since our engagement, I realized that now was only my first time to introduce Pasquale as my fiancé. He was my fiancé, my future husband, but he wasn't the one who had me half naked hours ago. His name wasn't the one I moaned and screamed, and he wasn't the one who had made me come so hard my body went totally limp after. Pasquale took my hand and brought it to his lips. Your shyness is becoming princess. His action and words were unexpected. They were also something I wasn't used to, and I found myself flushing as I felt everyone looking at me. Still clasping my hand, Pasquale told Jurian, I am her fiancé, Pasquale Hernandez. He said it like he had announced he was king and he expected Jurian to kiss his feet for it. Unbidden, my gaze strayed to Alejandro. His eyes bored through me like he was begging me for the right to knock some humility into the Panther Prince. I looked away hurriedly before I could end up giggling. It's nice to meet you. Thankfully, Jurian didn't appear to mind Pasquale's obnoxious tone. Glancing at me with concern, he asked, Isn't it kind of late for you all to be out here? Pasquale had already rejoined his men, leaving me with Alejandro. Looked at him for help, but he only shrugged. We're here for our research. Lies always had me stammering. I gestured to Alejandro. He's a writer. Oh. I could see Jurian had a hard time believing me, and I couldn't really blame him. Alejandro, with his in-your-face good looks, appeared too flamboyant to pass as a writer. You're writing a book? Jurian asked Alejandro. Fearing Alejandro's answer, I said quickly, Yes. About what? I searched madly for a topic, and all I could think about was reality. About vampires? Jurian blinked. Really? Beside me, I could feel Alejandro trying to glare me into shutting up. Yep. Fiction. Like there's Medi? And he likes Belle. That sounds like Twilight, Jurian said. I blurted out. Did I mention Belle's a guy too? Jurian looked at Alejandro with interest. It is true, Alejandro finally said. Crap. Alejandro was really going to chomp me into pieces after this. As I tried to think of something to say that could prevent my death, Alejandro was speaking again, asking Jurian about his work. Yes, I know this place like the back of my hand. I see. Would you mind accompanying my air team for the meantime? I've just realized I have one last thing to do before I can leave the city. This was news to me, and I couldn't help but ask, Where are you going? Alejandro. Calys' expressive eyes belied her casual tone. She was jealous. Should have made Alejandro happy, but it only pissed him off. Whose fault was it that she couldn't straight out say what she felt? Pasquale loudly claiming to be Calys Adelarde's future husband still grated on his nerves, and it was one of his reasons for leaving her side. If he stayed 1 minute longer in their company, Alejandro would really end up killing Pasquale. He hated it. Goddamn hated it every time he saw Pasquale touch Calys and not have the right to do anything about it. But he also had another reason for leaving, one more pressing and one he didn't want to tell Calys about until he was sure. To Calys, he gave a mocking bow and said, It's my off-duty hours, princess. So I'm afraid I don't owe you any answers. I'll come back as soon as I can. Stay close to Mr. Ranger here. Jurian was frowning. If you are under her employ and were hired to guard her, you must not stray from her side. Alejandro snorted. Trust me, she is no shrinking flower. She is a woman and as such she must be protected. So this boy not only looked like a fucking angel but he spoke and thought like one too. Alejandro knew there was a reason why he hated him at first sight. Baring his teeth in a smile he said, "It's a good thing you're here then." Turning his back on the ranger, he bowed to Calys again. "I'll see you soon, princess." And then he left to start killing vampires. He had noticed the bloodsuckers following them the moment they got past the city limits. No one should have known they were taking this route to reach the Adelardi lands in the north. But the vampires had known, which only meant they had a mole among them, and Alejandro was determined to find out who it was. Changing to his lichen form, he loped through the forest, his preternatural speed turning him into a blur. He spotted them a few meters away from where Calys was and clawed his way to the top of a tree, and then he watched and waited. They were young and inexperienced vampires, their powers fed by bloodlust but not much else. It took them a full minute to realize they were not alone, but by then it was too late. Alejandro Moretti had already learned what he needed to know. Took bare seconds to decimate their numbers. Blood streaked his thick white fur as he slashed their throats with his claws. The air around him began carrying the stench of death, and soon it would reach Calys and the others. It was Alejandro's warning to whoever was snitching on them. He would be found sooner or later, and when he would know what would be the end of him. Alejandro left one alive for him to interrogate. The vampire was on the ground trying to crawl away from him. Shifting to human form, he landed one light kick on the vampire's side, enough to have his body flip on the ground and the bloodied creature looking up at him. Damn. This was no vampire. It was a shifter, a hyena, and one of the men he and Calys had fought when they were at the den. "Who sent you here?" he demanded. "Answer me truthfully, and I may not kill you." "A scarred man," the hyena choked. "Not shifter, not vampire. Something different, but not human. Sometimes he smells like he's decaying from inside." Chapter 5. Alejandro. The town of Midway was aptly named, being the only town located at the halfway line of the Everglades. Before and beyond it were pine trees, hundreds of them, their gnarly limbs and tall thin bodies eternally blurred by cold mists. But unknown to the human hikers who ate at the town's cozy-looking restaurants and rented rooms from their bed and breakfasts, Midway was a shifter town, melting pot of non-human races. Bear shifters served as the local police and gossipy birds worked at the exclusive boutiques lining the streets. Wherever Alejandro looked, a different kind of shifter would be greeting him with a smile. It was as if every shifter race was represented in Midway, with the possible exception of the near-extinct race of the Mariposa. "Is it your first time to be here?" Calys asked. "Yes." She looked at him hopefully. "And how do you find it so far?" "It's nothing like I expected," he answered honestly. He had heard others talking about Midway being an open town of sorts, but the harmony that existed between the different races was still surprising. Normally, birds and rodents were instinctively antagonistic toward each other, but if he wasn't mistaken, the couple at the bakery across him was exactly that. A male rodent and a female bird. Princess. Pasquale suddenly appeared in front of them. Unlike him and Calys, the Panther Prince still insisted on dressing formally even while trekking through the forest. As such, his fine white shirt was spotted with dirt and his expensive pants were caked with mud. Hernandez made a ludicrous picture, but instead of amusing Alejandro, the fact only served to make him testy. Was his Hellcat truly serious about marrying the most idiotic panther on the planet? Yes. Calys smiled at her fiancé. The smile made him crack his knuckles. The sound had Pasquale moving away from him, which was good, but it also made him crowd closer to Calys. That was not good. "Are you sure we need to stop for the night here?" Pasquale was unsuccessful in keeping the irritation out of his voice. Stopping at Midway was not a part of his plan, and all these delays were making it harder for him to nail down a time and place for Calys' assassination. When the vampire he had paid to kill her last night was a no-show, Pasquale realized that her death was just something he had to take care on his own. It was the only way to get to the next step of his plan. Calys had a painful grimace on her face. I'm afraid we do. It's that day. For me. It took a while for Pasquale to understand what his fiancée meant, and when he did, he had even greater trouble hiding the fact that he found her condition grotesque. She was really a human monster, lacking even the delicacy not to talk about things like that with a prince like him. I'm already feeling weak as it is. Later I'll be taking medications to knock me out. The last words caught Pasquale's attention. One of the reasons why he had other assassins take care of Calys was because of her freakish strength, but if today meant she'd be bedridden all day, maybe this unscheduled stop would work in his favor. Alejandro was more disgusted than surprised when Pasquale suddenly appeared in high spirits. The panther really did want his hellcat dead, and he was so narcissistic that he didn't even care how obvious he was being. If that is the case, Your Highness, then bed rest is in order. He was all solicitous warmth now as he fussed over Calys' condition, asking about her medication. Maybe you should increase your dosage, Pasquale was murmuring. Helpfully. You would not want to be waking up in the middle of the night in pain. Alejandro watched Calys nod, her big blue eyes full of trusting agreement. Well, there it was. Apparently she could lie if she deemed it for a good cause. I'm going to rent one of the cottages at the end of the road. Calys pointed to the location she and Alejandro had decided on using to set their trap for Pasquale. I've told Alejandro to stand guard while I rest. He'll be at the other house to ensure that no one comes to disturb me. Pasquale nodded. I see. Yes, they did see. They saw how his mind was now working furiously, going over the information Calys provided him. It was like watching a man tie a noose around his own neck to hang himself. When Pasquale left, he and Calys gazed at each other. It is done. But he was saying it to give her a chance to back out, because if she really wanted to save the panther's damn neck, Alejandro would make it possible, even if it went against his good judgment. Calys shoved her hands into the pockets of her cargo pants. I know, he said quietly. You're not to blame. You know that. I know. Her smile was clearly for his sake. You've told Jurian to go ahead of us. It was a deliberate change of subject, and Alejandro obliged, knowing that the princess too soft heart made her feel guilty over Pasquale's inevitable fate. Yes. He didn't ask questions. Alejandro had a feeling he knew why it was so, but he held himself from voicing his suspicions. There was time enough later to talk about the ranger. For now they were better off concentrating on trapping Pasquale and finding out why he wanted Calys dead. Calys' answering smile was more genuine this time and tinged with relief. I'm glad. I wouldn't want him harmed. Privately, Alejandro doubted the younger man was easily harmed. Someone who could so easily mask his footsteps, even against shifter hearing, wouldn't be the kind that was easily killed. He will be all right, princess, he said. I hope so. She sighed, and Alejandro found his gaze straying towards her breasts and the way they heaved against the scooped neckline of her tight shirt. His gaze moved downwards, Alejandro taking in how her boyish pants only served to emphasize her tiny waist. When Calys swallowed, licking her lips, would you like to take a drink with me? It was stupid to spend more time alone with the princess. He knew that, but even so he could not help it. When she smiled at him, his chest tightened, yet another proof that what he was doing was stupid, dangerously so. I know just the place, she told him. Moments later, they found themselves in a bar reminiscent of an Old West saloon. Even its staff was dressed in costume, the men sporting tall cowboy hats and the women outfitted like milkmaids. Howdy, one of the servers tipped his hat as he came to their table. What can I get you fine folks? Just orange juice for me, please, Calys said. Ice-cold beer, Alejandro said. When the waiter left, they looked at each other, and an awkward silence was born. This is like our first date. Clearly, his hellcat had a knack for making things even more awkward. Alejandro shook his head firmly. We are not going to talk about that. A crestfallen expression fell over her face. He steeled himself against that look. No. But before she could finish talking, the doors of the bar swung open and a group of shifters swaggered in, panthers and drunk by the smell of them. They kicked chairs out of their way before settling on the stools behind the bar. Do you know them? He asked Calys under his breath. I think they're from the Cortez pack. Mean drunkards, almost all of them. She whispered. As the Panthers shouted for beer, one of the newcomers slapped the behind of a milkmaid passing by, causing her to drop the tray she was holding and splash water on the Panther. You'll pay for that, slut. At the words, Alejandro's fingers wrapped around Calys' wrist, knowing she was the type to interfere. Her blue eyes were fiery with superhero fervor. He must be taught the error of his ways. A sense of déjà vu hit him, and he immediately checked the princess' eyes for any signs of a dark fit coming over her. Calys made a face. No, I'm not going to change just like that, he said readily. You did before the moment you saw someone about to be bullied. That was different. I wasn't sure about you helping me right or wrong, but now I am. You will. Look who's here. A mug of beer was slammed down on their table, forcing Alejandro and Calys to lean away from each other. It's the human monster and the Moretti dog. Calys. The way Alejandro's jaw tightened made my chest squeeze in pain. It was so unfair how everyone treated him when he hadn't even done anything to deserve being called like that. It was his brother Domenico who had caused his clan to be the butt of everyone's jokes. But even what Domenico Moretti had done wasn't a sin. He had only chosen to love his human wife with all his heart. And for that, the other wolves had called him a dog. Before I could think of what I was doing, I had already shot off my seat and slapped the Panther's face. Apologize to my cavalier now. The Panther rubbed his jaw. You fucking slapped me, bitch. I glared at him. I'll do more than that if you don't say sorry to him now. He looked at his companions and in unison, they jumped off their stools and stalked towards us, menacing scowls on their faces. Alejandro gently pulled me back. Princess, let it go. I shook my head. No. I was wrong to let them call you that before. Promised. You remember? I won't let it happen again. Even if you fight them off, it won't change a thing. I winced. Wasn't he basically dumping me right now, in public, for the nth time? Alejandro cursed. What the fuck? The Panther roared. Are you actually having some stupid lovers' quarrel right now? No. Alejandro denied. Yes, I snapped at the same time. Then I realized what Alejandro said. Right. He really was dumping me in public. The Panther burst into laughter. I think the human monster just got dumped. I was so depressed I couldn't even muster enough strength to get mad. Yay for you, Cortez Panther. Way to go, rubbing salt on my wound. Alejandro's cheeks had stained with color. It's not like that, dumbass. The princess is engaged to Prince Pasquale. He took my hand, surprising me. Also, I think you're right. I blinked. I am. They should be shown the error of their ways. It was already evening when Alejandro and I came out of the bar. It had taken us longer than I expected to knock everyone out. The Panthers had put up a good fight, and there was also the fact that they did outnumber us 10-1. Why didn't you have one of your fits, damn it? Alejandro bit out as we headed to the cottage I had rented for the night. I told you it doesn't work like that. She only comes out when I feel angry. Or I'm in real danger. Alejandro was incredulous. You were fighting off 10 Panthers and that's still not enough danger for her. I shrugged. His teeth audibly gnashed against each other. She knows how strong I am. I don't think she knows how weak you are. Sighing, I changed the subject, knowing there was no point convincing him that my darker half knew what she was doing. Did you notice that none of Pasquale's pack came to help us? Alejandro's face became grimmer. I did. When we reached the cottage I had rented out, he said quietly, "Good night." His eyes spoke a different message. "Take care." "Good night," I said quietly. "I will." Inside the cottage I took my time showering. Under the stream of water I also found myself praying. I had a feeling tonight might be the last time I'd ever see Pasquale. Our plan to trap Pasquale was simple. It had to be, since there were just the two of us. Alejandro would circle the town, waiting for whomever Pasquale would hire to kill me. No matter how many they were, we both knew he would able to handle it. He was not the den's one fighter for nothing. As for me, all I had to do was wait. Once Pasquale realized none of his hired assassins would be coming, he was likely to come to me and finish the job himself. Knowing Pasquale, he would engage me in small talk first, hoping to take me by surprise. That was the plan, but it was an epic fail. Pasquale was already knocking on my door when I came out of the shower. Right. Way, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't right that he was here too early. Running down the stairs, I grasped the doorknob as I checked the peephole. Pasquale was smiling, and he wasn't alone. He had a young boy with him, a bird shifter, and Pasquale had a gun pointed to his head. I opened the door. Pasquale. Hello, my princess. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I didn't even think of pretending. I'm not going to fight. Just let the boy go, and I swear on my father's honor, I will do whatever you ask me. He stepped forward, pulling the boy with him, and I moved aside to let them in. Close the door, he said pleasantly, still holding the gun to the boy's head. When I was done, he gestured to the couch. Sit down, Calys. Again I did as asked. The boy's eyes were filled with fear, and my heart clenched for him. It's going to be okay. Will it? Pasquale snarled. I've a mind to make you kill yourself right now. If I do, will you let him go? He barked out a humorless laugh. Always so damn heroic even when everyone calls you the human monster. All these years you've known how the Panthers never thought of you as their own, so why do you damn keep trying to force yourself on them? I'm not forcing myself on anyone. Yes, you are, he shouted. You should have killed them all. If I had your powers, I would have killed them all. Sheer fury had his hand shaking, and the boy started to cry as Pasquale's gun knocked against his head. Swallowing, I said, Please, Pasquale. Please, anything. Someone knocked on the door, making all three of us freeze. Pasquale's eyes burned into mine, and I knew one wrong word from me and the boy was dead. Trying to keep my voice from trembling, I asked, Who is it? It's Jurian. Oh my God, no. I really need to talk to you. Get rid of him, Pasquale hissed. I nodded. Just let me think of. Calys, I really need to talk to you. It's about Raul. For some reason, the mention of my cousin's name had Pasquale tense. Get him to come in, he bit out. I shook my head furiously. No, please let me just make an excuse. Pasquale cocked the gun. I won't ask you again. Crap. Crap, crap, crap. Dark half, if you can hear me now, you need to come out. But a second passed and nothing happened. Forcing my limbs to move, I called out, just a sec. I tried to think of a way to reverse the situation without risking any harm to the boy or Jurian, but nothing came to me. Nothing. Slowly, I opened the door. I'm sorry this is sudden, but I really have to talk to you about Raul. I heard footsteps heading towards me. Behind me, Pasquale hissed. Get him to come in. I forced a smile. See, can we talk about this inside? I was hoping you'd say that. There was something odd about his smile, but I was too anxious to figure out what it was. All I knew was that I now had two innocents relying on me to keep them safe. God, please help me, I prayed as I reluctantly pulled the door open. I waited for Jurian to come inside, but he did something else. Something that I never thought he'd do, something I would have never imagined possible. Wings spread wide open, and then Jurian was flying inside. Behind me, Pasquale roared and the boy let out a scream of Chapter 7. Calys. A knock sounded on my door at promptly 10 minutes before 7, the exact time Alejandro told me he would be back to accompany me to dinner. I hurried to open the door, but my smile faded when I saw his face. Gone was the tender lover I had been with the whole night, the one who had woken me up with kisses and even served me breakfast in bed. The werewolf in front of me was as handsome and as powerful, but his face was devoid of expression. My voice faltered. Is something wrong? He shook his head. No, his lips curved in an odd smile. You look beautiful. Thank you. I had dressed carefully for tonight's dinner, knowing that appearances were a must. Not wanting to look too young or too feminine, I had opted for a pinstripe jacket and matching skirt. You look good too, I mumbled. Alejandro was dressed as formally, also in black and white. I knew he was only a couple of years older than me, but when he looked like this, he felt light years ahead of me. He took my hand. Are you nervous? Yes. But it wasn't for the reason he thought I was. He was the one who made me nervous, but even I couldn't explain why that was. Alejandro held my hand as we went down the stairs, heading straight to the dining hall where representatives from the Panthera awaited. Before we enter, you should know that your cousin Raul is also here together with a few members of your pack. I stuttered to a stop. Why is he here? The Panthera invited him. Alejandro's hold on my hand tightened. Whatever happens, I am here for you. Remember that. I shook my head. The truth was beginning to sink in. The whole Panther might not believe me. They might think I was behind the deaths of Pasquale and his pack members. I could tell them that they were the first one to attack me, but it would be my word, an outsider's word, against a Panther whose reputation in life had been beyond pristine. They might sentence me to death. I didn't realize I had said the words out loud until Alejandro said very decisively. No protectiveness glittered in his gaze. I won't let anything happen to you. Remember that. And then he was pulling the door open. The men inside the room stood up as I entered. There were 8 men and 2 women. 4 of the men were from the Panthera. The rest consisted of Raul and his companions. It was always hard for me to look at Raul. He looked so much like Veneto, and the resemblance was heartbreaking. He could have been a brother to us if he wanted to. We would have loved him and faithfully served him, but he hadn't wanted that. He would never want it because he wanted to be Veneto's only heir. Thank you for granting us your time, the man standing at the head of the table murmured. Benito was an old friend of my father, a silver-haired man who held the highest position in the Panthera. You know everyone here, I assume. Yes, Your Majesty. Benito, like my father, was also alpha of his pack. Glanced at Alejandro. May I introduce my cavalier? Prince Alejandro of the Lickin Morettis. An honor, Benito murmured. The honor, Your Majesty, is mine, Alejandro returned. When Benito inclined his head, all the men took their seats while Alejandro pulled back the chair at the foot of the table for me. This placed me adjacent to Raul while Alejandro sat across him, right next to one of Raul's female companions. I would like us to enjoy this meal in comfort, Benito began, and as such I believe it would be better if we postpone our talk tomorrow. This is fine with you, Calys. Yes, Your Majesty. Raul. Of course, sire. Whatever you think is always best. He had always been obsequious, my cousin. Course after course was served. The food was delicious, but all of it tasted like ashes in my mouth. The roast beef placed in front of me made me want to puke. It reminded me of the scene inside the cottage when Jurian had flown me back to the place at my insistence. I had wanted to be sure that Alejandro was all right. He was, but the others were not, all of them reduced into bloodied pieces of flesh on the floor. The thought caused my hand to shake, and my knife slipped from my hold, clanging to the floor. Almost all eyes went to me and I flushed, mumbling an apology. The server behind me moved to pick it up, but I shook my head with a polite smile. It's fine, I can do it. I will fetch a new knife right away, Your Highness, the server said with a bow before turning away to leave. Bending down, I reached for the knife, and that was when I saw it. The woman next to Alejandro was doing her best to fondle Alejandro under the table. In his defense, he kept moving her hand off his legs every time she reached out for his cock. He was trying, but in my opinion he wasn't trying hard enough. I straightened on my seat. The woman next to Raul smiled at me, a Cheshire smile that made me want to lunge at her and scratch her eyes out. Everything all right, princess? Her voice was mockingly solicitous. I sent the knife flying, and she screamed as it zinged over her head, pulling out a strand and nailing it to the wall behind her. She was still screaming. Please relax, I said in the same solicitous voice. I have very good aim. You had nothing to fear of. Alejandro's profile had become tense, and I knew he had realized exactly why. I was furious. Then again, it wasn't really that hard to guess why, was it? Are you insane? The woman, Dolly was her real name if I recalled correctly, demanded, her voice shaking with fear. Not at all, I answered politely. I just take offense when someone attempts to touch what's mine. Realization dawned on her face and she laughed, the sound jarring my ears. Are you talking about this beautiful man next to me? Surely you're being too possessive over your cavalier? It's not like he's your consort. Without looking at Alejandro, I said quietly, he is the man I love. Silence followed, one that I hoped Alejandro would be the one to break. But in the end it was Raul who spoke. And there it is. He threw a contemptuous look my way. The reason why she had Pasquale Hernandez and his pack members killed, and the death knell of our pack if she becomes queen. Alejandro. Alejandro stood before Calys' bedroom door, a drawn expression on his face, his body stiff with tension. He is the man I love. Even though dinner had long been over, Calys' last words kept echoing inside Alejandro's mind, which still grappled with disbelief. Had she really said that? And in front of the Panthera and her enemies? His fists clenched in frustration. If he had doubts before, he had none now. His princess was extremely good at making things more awkward. Hell, most awkward. It wasn't only his mind that was affected. His heart was too, the way it had been thundering against his chest since he first heard her speak the words. God damn it, why did she have to say that? Why? Didn't she know those words would make it impossible for him to stay at her side like before? Slowly he raised his fist to the door. He only had to knock twice before Calys opened the door. She looked tired and scared, and he knew he and not her almost dying was the reason for it. Would you like to come in? He nodded, and she stepped aside, closing the door behind him. After Calys walked to stand in front of him, gnawing at her lip, she looked at him as if waiting for him to speak. When he didn't, she blurted out, "Aren't you going to say anything?" He said tonelessly, "I am." She held her breath, but seeing her do it only made him furious. With her and himself. God damn it, why did she have to do that? Why was she setting herself up for pain when he had laid everything so damn clearly to her from the very start? He said flatly, "You made a mistake." Calys shook her head, confusion clouding her expression. "I don't understand." He spelt out, "You made a mistake about saying you loved me." "But I didn't." When he didn't say anything, she insisted, "I didn't. Alejandro, I love you. I know I do. I've known it for a long time." She had known she loved him for a long time. She had loved him for a long time. God damn it to hell, why did she have to say that? Why did she have to feel that? Then I'm sorry. It killed him to look at her, but he knew he owed Calys at least that. "I'm sorry you feel that way." He could have said something more, but he didn't, knowing it would amount to nothing. What was the point? In the end, his decision, his feelings would remain the same. He would not allow himself to love her back. When he turned his back, Calys cried out. The cry was filled with so much pain he spun around, wondering if she had somehow hurt herself. Tears were running silently down her face. "Just like that," she whispered. "After everything, you're going to leave me? Just like that?" Why, goddamn it, why did she keep asking questions that were too damn awkward to answer? He forced himself to shrug, to turn away once more and move towards the door. "I'm going to check on what your cousin is up to." "Look at me," she begged. He reached for the knob. Behind him, Calys said brokenly, "You don't really care, do you? You just want this to be over. You've lost interest in me because I'm no longer a challenge. I thought I was different, but I wasn't. After everything, I'm just like all those women. You took them and left them." She choked on a sob. "I'm right, aren't I? Aren't I?" His hand shook as he turned the knob. It took everything in Alejandro not to say a word, not to look back, not to stop moving until he had shut the door behind him. The last thing he heard was Calys crying. Warriors never cried, she liked to say, but she was crying now. Crying so damn hard it was as if she could no longer breathe. God, God, God. Make her stop crying. Make her realize what he knew. It was safer this